In the late 1890s, on the frozen, muddy banks of the North Dvina River in Russia, a team of obsessive excavators led by Professor Vladimir Amalitsky was fighting against time and the cold. They weren't looking for gold, and they weren't digging for coal. They were hunting for a myth. Locals had whispered for years about dragon stones washing up on the riverbanks. Strange, concrete hard nodules that looked like giant coffins made of sandstone. The conditions were brutal, the kind of cold that hurts your lungs, but what Amalitsky pulled from that gray mud would eventually freeze the blood of the entire scientific community. He ordered his men to crack open one of the massive sandstone nodules. Inside, they didn't find a dinosaur. They didn't find a fish. They found a face that shouldn't have existed. It was a skull, perfectly preserved, staring back at them with a set of teeth that looked like they belonged to a saber-toothed tiger. But this rock layer was dated millions of years before mammals ever evolved. It was a biological impossibility. At first, the team didn't know how to classify it. Imagine the confusion standing there in the Russian wilderness, holding a skull that breaks all the rules. It had the heavy, armored bone structure of a reptile, cold and archaic. But it had the complex, differentiated teeth of a mammal, incisors, massive canines, and molars. It was a chimera, a monster that straddled the line between the cold-blooded past and the warm-blooded future. They assumed it must be some freak anomaly, a terrifying dead end in the tree of life. But as they cracked open more nodules along the river, the horror set in. There wasn't just one. There were dozens. An entire pack of these monsters had been buried together in a sudden, catastrophic flood event hundreds of millions of years ago. The creatures were piled on top of each other, preserving a moment of prehistoric panic. This wasn't a random find. They had stumbled upon the dominant predator of a lost world. They named it Inostrancevia, the largest of the Gorgonopsids. And just like that, the history of Earth's predators had to be rewritten. What makes this discovery so unsettling, even today, is what it tells us about the software of nature. We like to think that features like saber-teeth or high-speed running are modern inventions of mammals like lions or wolves. But the Gorgonopsid proves that nature had already perfected the ultimate killing machine 260 million years ago, long before the first dinosaur ever hatched. When Amalitsky cleaned the skull, he revealed a jaw mechanism that was engineered for pure trauma. The skull wasn't designed to hold on to prey. It was designed to smash it. The mouth could open incredibly wide, far wider than a modern crocodile, allowing those 12-centimeter sabers to clear the lower jaw and strike downwards like pickaxes. It forces you to ask yourself a difficult question. If this design was so perfect, so efficient at killing, why did it vanish? And what kind of cataclysm is strong enough to erase a creature that looks like it was built to survive the apocalypse? To understand the scale of this monster, you have to mentally delete the world you know. Forget the green forests of the Jurassic. The world of the Gorgonopsid, the Permian Period, was a harsh, dry supercontinent called Pangaea. It was a land of extremes. The interior of Pangaea was so far from the ocean that it became a vast, roasting desert, trapping heat like a planetary oven. In this hostile environment, survival wasn't about being graceful. It was about being brutal. The Inostrancevia didn't hide in the shadows. It was the size of a grizzly bear, walking on four legs that were shifting from a reptilian sprawl to an upright mammalian stance. This gave it a terrifying silhouette, a tank that could run. Imagine seeing that coming at you through the heat haze. It's not a sluggish lizard dragging its belly. It's a high-speed executioner. It makes you realize how lucky we are that our ancestors were tiny, rat-like creatures hiding in burrows, because nothing on the surface stood a chance against this thing. Have you ever felt that primal fear when you hear a large animal moving in the dark? That instinct might be older than you think, perhaps a genetic memory from a time when these things owned the night. The bones found in Russia revealed something else, something that disturbed paleontologists for decades. The fossils were often found alongside the remains of Scutosaurus, a massive, armored plant-eater that looked like a biological fortress. The Scutosaurus was covered in bony plates, osteoderms that made it nearly bite-proof. For a long time, scientists thought this armor made them invincible. But the Gorgonopsid skulls told a different story. Their saber teeth were thick, reinforced, and serrated. They were specifically evolved to puncture that armor. It was an evolutionary arms race played out in slow motion over millions of years. The prey built thicker walls, so the predator built a better battering ram. It's a chilling reminder that in nature, there is no such thing as safety. There is only a temporary stalemate. Every defense you build, nature will eventually design a weapon to break it. If you look at the technology we build today, tanks, bunkers, security systems, aren't we just continuing this same ancient war, just with metal instead of bone? As news of the Russian discovery spread, it became clear that the Gorgonopsid wasn't just a local curiosity. It was the ruler of a global empire. Similar fossils began to be identified in South Africa, in the Karoo Basin, proving that these creatures dominated the entire supercontinent. They were the first true apex predators of the land. Before them, predators were clumsy and limited. The Gorgonopsid was the first time evolution produced a creature that could actively hunt down anything, anywhere. They were the pioneers of terror. But the fossils in the North Dvina River held one final, dark secret. The layer of rock immediately above the dragon stones was empty, dead, silent. The Gorgonopsids didn't just evolve. They hit a wall. The strata of the earth turned from fossil-rich sandstone to barren, black mud. Something happened. Something that didn't just kill the Gorgonopsids, but nearly killed the planet itself. The discovery of these bones was just the prologue to a much bigger murder mystery. The detectives found the body, but they were about to discover that the killer was the Earth itself. To truly grasp the horror of the Inostrancevia, you have to stop looking at it as a dinosaur. In fact, if you called it a dinosaur to a paleontologist, they would correct you immediately. This creature represents a ghost lineage, the Synapsids. It sits in the uncanny valley of evolution, a biological prototype that was testing out the features that would eventually make us human. When you look at the fossilized brain case, it suggests something terrifying. It wasn't just operating on reptilian instinct. It was calculating. The structure of its nasal cavity indicates it had a sense of smell that could track prey for miles across the desolate plains. And then there is the debate that keeps scientists awake at night. Was it warm-blooded? Evidence suggests that Gorgonopsids were already experimenting with endothermy, generating their own body heat. This means they didn't have to wait for the sun to warm them up like a lizard. They were active, high-energy hunters that could strike at dawn, at dusk, or in the pitch black of night. Imagine the terror of being a slow-moving herbivore in a world where the predator never sleeps. It challenges everything we assume about the sluggish past, doesn't it? If evolution had taken a slightly different turn, do you think intelligent life on Earth would look more like us, or more like them? The deeper you analyze the skeleton, the more you realize that the Inostrancevia was built for a specific kind of violence, the slash and pull. Most predators today, like lions, suffocate their prey. They clamp down on the windpipe and wait. But the Gorgonopsid didn't have time for that. Its neck muscles were incredibly thick, anchored to massive vertebrae that suggest the power of a bulldozer. The strategy was brutal efficiency. Drive the sabers in, use that massive neck to rip backward, and let massive blood loss do the rest. It was a killer designed to end fights in seconds, not minutes. This design tells us something about the environment it lived in. It tells us that competition was fierce. If you didn't kill your prey instantly, something else, something bigger or faster, would steal it. It was a world of thieves and butchers. When you look at the complexity of nature today, do you see harmony? Or do you just see a more polite version of this ancient, bloody competition? But a predator is nothing without its prey, and the Gorgonopsid was locked in an evolutionary arms race that defined the Permian Period. Its main food source was the Scutosaurus, a creature that was essentially a walking boulder. These herbivores had evolved skin so thick it was turning into bone, purely to survive the Gorgonopsid's bite. It is the classic military problem. When the tank gets thicker armor, the enemy builds a bigger missile. The Inostrancevia grew to 10 feet long not because it wanted to, but because it had to. It was trapped in a loop of gigantism. This is a dangerous game that evolution plays. By becoming a specialist, a giant killer of giants, the Gorgonopsid was painting itself into a corner. It required massive amounts of meat to fuel its warm-blooded metabolism. It needed large prey. It was perfectly adapted to a world that was stable. But as we know, stability on Earth is a lie. Do you think we are making the same mistake today, building our entire civilization around resources and conditions that could vanish overnight? Let's talk about that world for a moment. Pangaea. We often picture it as a lush, tropical paradise, but the reality of the late Permian was far more hostile. Because all the landmasses were smashed together into one supercontinent, the rain clouds from the ocean couldn't reach the center. The heart of Pangaea was a vast, arid wasteland, a place of extreme temperatures where seasons were violent monsoons followed by months of drought. The Inostrancevia ruled a kingdom of dust. Water was life and water was death. The waterholes were the only places to drink, but they were also the perfect ambush points. The fossils found in Russia show clusters of animals that died together, likely huddled around the last shrinking mud puddles of a megadrought. It paints a bleak picture. The ultimate predator, capable of killing anything, slowly dying of thirst alongside its prey. It's a humbling reminder that no matter how sharp your teeth are, you cannot fight the climate. When the rain stops, the king dies just like the peasant. Have you ever been in a place so dry, so hot, that you felt the environment itself was hostile? That was the daily reality of the Permian. And then the trap snapped shut. The Gorgonopsid was the masterpiece of the Paleozoic era, but it was standing on a trapdoor. Deep beneath the ground in what is now Siberia, ironically exactly where Amelitsky found the fossils, the Earth was waking up. A massive plume of magma, known as the Siberian Traps, was pushing its way to the surface. It wasn't a volcano like we see in movies. It was a flood of lava that would last for 1,000,000 years. The Inostrancevia didn't know it, but the air it was breathing was slowly changing. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The oceans were beginning to acidify. The very sophisticated biological engine that made the Gorgonopsid so successful, its high metabolism, its need for massive calories, was about to become its greatest weakness. In a dying world, being big is a death sentence. Being efficient is a curse. The smaller, scuttling ancestors of mammals, the cynodonts, were hiding in the shadows, eating scraps, able to survive on almost nothing. The king was about to fall, not by a challenger, but by starvation. It makes you wonder, in the face of a global crisis, is it better to be the strong lion or the adaptable rat? The end didn't come from the stars. There was no asteroid, no flash of light, no instant mercy. The end came from beneath their feet. In the region of Siberia where Amelitsky would one day find their bones, the Earth's crust simply tore open. We call them the Siberian Traps, but that name sounds too contained, too small. This was a flood basalt event of a magnitude that the human mind struggles to comprehend. Imagine an eruption not of a single mountain, but of a continent-sized wound, bleeding lava continuously for 1,000,000 years. It covered an area the size of the United States in molten rock. But the lava wasn't the killer. Lava is local. It destroys what it touches. The real killer was the gas. As the magma burned through massive deposits of coal and peat buried deep in the crust, it released trillions of tons of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. The sky turned a sickly shade of yellow. The sun, once the source of life, became a weapon. Temperatures spiked, turning the already hot Pangaea into a global furnace. It forces us to confront a terrifying reality. The planet we live on is a volatile engine, and sometimes the engine overheats. If you looked up at the sky today and saw it changing color, would you know it was the end? Or would you keep going about your day hoping it would pass? For the Inostrancevia, this was a slow-motion nightmare. The Gorgonopsids were apex predators adapted for a specific, high-energy lifestyle. They needed oxygen to fuel their powerful muscles, and they needed massive amounts of meat to sustain their bulk. But as the atmosphere thickened with greenhouse gases, oxygen levels plummeted. The air became thin and stale at sea level, equivalent to the top of a high mountain today. The specialized lungs of the Gorgonopsid, built for the chase, were now gasping for every breath. The herds of Scutosaurus began to die off, their heavy bodies unable to cope with the heat stress and the collapsing vegetation. The food chain didn't just break, it evaporated. The forests died first, replaced by fungi that thrived on the rotting wood. Then the herbivores fell. And finally, the kings of the Permian were left alone in a silent, gray world, starving in a wasteland of ash. It is a haunting image. The most powerful animal on Earth, with the deadliest weapons evolution had ever designed, defeated not by a stronger rival, but by the air itself. It makes you realize that strength is irrelevant when the rules of the game change so drastically. Do we, as a species, rely too much on our strength and technology, forgetting that we are still breathing the same fragile atmosphere that killed the Gorgonopsids? The oceans, too, turned against life. As the planet warmed, the ocean currents stalled. The water became stagnant and anoxic, devoid of oxygen. Pink bacteria bloomed in the dead water, releasing hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs and is lethal to most life forms. This toxic gas bubbled out of the seas and swept across the land, poisoning whatever had managed to survive the heat. Paleontologists call this the Great Dying. It is the single most catastrophic event in the history of our planet. 90% of all life on Earth vanished. It was the closest our world ever came to becoming a dead rock like Mars. The Gorgonopsid lineage was completely extinguished. There are no Gorgonopsids today. No descendants, no distant cousins hiding in the jungle. They were wiped clean from the board. Their specialized teeth, their heavy bones, their dominance. All of it was a dead end. It serves as a dark memento mori. Being the best at what you do is no guarantee of survival if what you do becomes obsolete. In our modern world of hyperspecialization, is there a lesson here about the value of being adaptable rather than being dominant? But in the shadow of this apocalypse, something small was moving. While the giant Inostrancevia gasped and died, another group of therapsids, our direct ancestors, managed to hold on. They were the cynodonts. They were small, often no bigger than a badger. They lived in burrows, underground, where the air was cooler and the toxic winds couldn't reach them. They were scavengers, eating whatever scraps they could find. Roots, insects, maybe even the decaying carcasses of the fallen Gorgonopsids. They survived not because they were strong, but because they were insignificant. They were humble, and because they survived, they carried the spark of life through the darkness of the Triassic, eventually evolving into mammals, and finally into you and me. We are here today only because the monsters died. We are the children of the survivors, the ones who hid while the giants burned. It's a strange thought, isn't it? That your existence is owed to a global catastrophe that destroyed a world you never knew. Do you feel a connection to those tiny survivors? Or does the loss of such majestic monsters like the Gorgonopsid feel like a tragedy to you? The reign of the Gorgonopsid teaches us that the Earth is not a static stage. It is a dynamic, violent, and indifferent system. The Inostrancevia was a masterpiece of biological engineering, a creature that should have ruled forever. But nature has no loyalty to its creations. It builds monsters, tests them, and then discards them when the environment shifts. Today, we dig up their bones in the freezing Russian tundra, marveling at their sabers and their power, telling stories of a time when mammals were the prey. But we should also see them as a warning. We are the new apex predators. We are the new rulers of a global empire. And just like the Gorgonopsids, we are altering our atmosphere, pushing the climate into unknown territory. The difference is we know what happened last time. The Gorgonopsids didn't have a choice. They were passengers on a geological train wreck. We are the conductors. The question is, are we smart enough to slow the train down? Or will our bones be the ones confusing the archaeologists of the next great civilization? Outro and community engagement. History is often presented as a list of dates and names, but when you look at the Permian, you realize it is a story of survival against impossible odds. The fact that life exists at all is the real paradox. I want to hear from you in the comments. When you look at a creature like the Inostrancevia, do you see a monster, or do you see a tragedy? And more importantly, do you think humanity would survive a great dying event today, or have we become too specialized, just like them? These discussions are why I built this channel, to dig up the truths that time tried to bury. If you want to join us on this journey into the deep past, to explore the anomalies and the horrors of Earth's history, please consider subscribing to Earth Paradox. We are building a community of curious minds here, and I'd be honored to have you as part of the expedition. There are many more layers to uncover. I'll see you in the next discovery.